Well, that took a little while. Hey everyone, Rillian here for another 2_MK stream. Today's content is as usual being rebroadcast from the Amara 2_MK channel to the main team 2_MK channel with full permission. Today's going to be more of yet another stream of consciousness style thing, even more so than the usual disc guidance, which is usually pretty loose. In this case, not even going that far. We're just going through how a kata tends to get made, why particular decisions are made, things that you're trying to do with it overall. So you can expect a lot of me talking somewhat to myself as I go through the things required to make this work out. Starting with Vega because I felt like all buttons are good. So the last kata for this year is Kata 25. Kata 26 is more specific. It's something we discovered while doing some work with Omni Rabbit's Lara once when he was here. Recognizing that, for some reason, Lara's spacing allows people to backdash out of a certain thing she does. So here we see she'll do one and then two. We were learning a little bit back then that you can actually get away from Lara's second medium kick. But obviously, that didn't seem like a lot to learn. It was high level, really specifics, that sort of thing. But there you go. If you're walking away and she does this, and your character has decent walk speed, and you can react in time, you actually just backdash out. It's hard to do though. And you could always argue, what's the point of this? Well, in certain Lara mix-ups it's meaningful to know. But not that often. If you got someone who basically goes for it, something specific every time after it, you've got a reason to do that. This time, not so much really. But it became important to think about what you could use this for and what it represents or parallels to in the regular sense. Because all you really have to do is hold back. Granted, she can get you on clipping your legs. But that's important, and while we may not actually end up releasing this kata in its direct form, it's just development because she is going to have that move slowed a bit in AE, according to the last information we got. It's still sort of useful to know because there's a lot of things that Lara does that you can backdash out of. And there are a lot of things that various characters in this game do that depending on how good your character's backdash is, you get out of them. Just backdash. Like, you avoid the hit entirely. The hit that they have to follow it up, that is advantageous. There's a range where it just doesn't work. So in this case, Amara's Lara bot is a little different for various reasons. But it does have this setup where it is doing the standing jab after this. Sometimes anyway. And the thought was, can you backdash out of that? Is there a range at which Lara can't hit you with that? Now I can tell you from obviously extensive work on it that, yeah, totally. It's not really even that hard. She tends to clip you with her crouching light kick, but her medium kick doesn't usually get you either. So what use is a kata like this? What is it for? Well, if you start to identify one character's ability to grab onto you in certain situations, then it's usually not so hard to figure out what you can apply this to that is part of some other character's moveset or toolset. In the case of both those buttons, we're back to the same old thing that is so important to this game. It's so important to all fighting games, really. The concept of a move that is safe, but you should challenge it. But because of the range, you shouldn't always challenge it, and then you have to think about a bunch of stuff in there. So what she has here is basically clap, then forward, and a little poking stuff. I don't even remember why she has clap here, honestly. But the Larabot that actually exists on most people's systems, the Larabot you all are familiar with, doesn't work like this. The Larabot you're familiar with does something else. And as I said, Mars is different, but really this isn't about the bot that normally is used. It's just the concepts that I'm working through right now. So I've been watching the others play with their own. Tried some stuff with Action 2, I believe. And recognized, okay, that doesn't help because you backdash and you get clipped by that. But then recognized, aside from the fact that that's a fairly good setup for some characters, well, for Lara against some characters, it's not really that much damage. And depending on the speed of your backdash, the Lara player has to do that immediately. They have to read the backdash. They can't react to the backdash or react to the concept of the backdash even. When I say someone reacts to the concept of a backdash, it's basically they've reached a point where they've hit a particular thing and feel it's now time to do it. But they didn't go into it expecting or intending to do that, so their timing's a little off. A couple of frames, honestly. That's about it. But that's all you really need for most characters to get out of this. Characters have different speeds of backdash, and they have some other stuff that's really interesting too, which I'll be showing off as we go along, because this is part of the reason that I didn't think that this cat is necessarily the greatest idea. It has a lot of specifics that rely on the properties of your character's backdash more so than they rely on a specific thing you want to learn. But if everyone has a different thing they're supposed to learn from it, then it's still useful kata. It just involves reading a lot more or reading a specific section that says, your character does this, so let's keep that up. Did I forget to turn off something? No, apparently not. Interesting. Okay. When we eventually show off the kata, there will be a specific version of this for you to see. But here, we're just looking for what you do in this situation. The sweep catches at minimum range. Lara's V-skill doesn't actually catch up with you that fast, that sort of thing. But here's our main look, and it's actually kind of hard to set it up. Because of the differences in timing on this version, if Lara cancels out of one of her buttons into the bolt, she'll generally end up close enough that you can't backdash out of it. Because she's technically doing bolt twice. She's doing one cancel one and one regular one, I think. Something like that. Well, let's take a look at action 1 again. Because there's stuff it is and stuff it's supposed to be. And I could totally switch them off. The main thing to keep in mind is that the range is the important thing. Because if you're playing neutral with Lara and you challenge her in particular ways, she's going to want to do certain things. And those certain things don't always work out. Especially if your opponent's timing isn't that perfect. Or you should check where you're even getting that clap from. Oh wait, no, never mind, I know now. That makes sense actually. Okay, sure. I'll accept the clap. It's either that or sunset. Really doesn't matter to me. So you can see that with Lara's timing a little bit off after that action, you just badash out. The better you time it, the harder this becomes. The better you time the bot, that is. So what's the important part of this? Let's turn back on action 2. Because the main thing is obviously about defense and understanding what to backdash out of. Huh, that's interesting. Well, not really, because I've done it already, but you see that you can shift yourself in such a way that if you backdash out of certain things, you don't necessarily not take damage, but you do avoid certain mix-ups. The problem is that you're avoiding those mix-ups by getting hit. This isn't always a terrible thing though, it depends on your character a whole lot. It's entirely possible, as you might have seen on Wednesday's stream, with Omni-Rabbit going up against the Korean player, to backdash out of a ton of Lara stuff. If you're really willing to do that. If you get enough advantage to just backdash out, you should probably do that. As you can see there, she doesn't even reach. And it is somewhat possible to be very fast about this. She's -2, I believe. Depending on how quickly the player goes into that move. Now, if they go into it immediately, your backdash will almost never, as far as I'm aware, be fast enough. Simply because of the way that frame data works. You'd have to have a backdash of what? I'm pretty sure your backdash would have to be 15, 17 frames in order to make it back out of that. And everyone more or less has a 20 to 21 frame backdash at minimum. I don't think there's actually a 20, but a ton of characters have 21 frame backdashes. So what are we looking for? We're looking for ways to get out of Lara stuff due to the timing of the backdash into block. And one of the ways that this helps a lot is understanding when to let go of the block button. Well, the block direction. It's understanding that despite the fact that you normally block the entire time, you don't have to. Blocking is something you can tap if you can time it right. In fact, in some games, you're pretty much required to. I can definitely let go of the back direction on the stick, in this case the pad, long before her move actually finishes. And the more hit stun the move has, the earlier you can do that. The reason this is important is because the amount of time it takes you to do certain moves while on defense changes based on how long you were holding the block itself. Especially due to input lag. You want to buffer as early as possible to get out of some stuff. So when you have a move that lets you block for a longer time, and by that I mean the block stun is naturally long in the game. If you feel her incoming, you press the button at the right time, you know exactly what's happened, you're confident that you have blocked, then you can move on to the next stage of being confident that you could let go of the block. And that's the beginning of this kata. The idea of, okay, I'm going to maximize the speed at which I can backdash out of block strings. And most people starting off would never think, why would I want to do that? That seems like a terrible idea. And it can, as she's demonstrating very clearly, be a terrible idea, depending on what danger you're in. But depending on your opponent, sometimes it's the best possible idea. But I'm doing it with Vega because I hadn't tested him yet. It's pretty easy to backdash out of stuff with this character. Let's go test some other characters with either slower total backdashes, in which case they wouldn't be able to actually make sure that they get out of range in time, or they don't have any time to block. They'd still be in their backdash at the time of blocking. But let's go up by, let's say, just one. Because many characters in the game have very similar backdashes. But Bison doesn't. Bison has a 22 frame forward dash and a 22 frame backdash. Yet somehow, probably because I'm so used to doing certain things with this character, it ends up that I end up blocking this with him. Or maybe he's OP in some way that I haven't learned of yet. There we go, that's getting a hit. Probably that I practiced on Vega and then got all into it. It also has to do with them hitting a second button. But even just character familiarity, just understanding your block animation, feeling it out, knowing where you are in terms of spacing and timing, can allow you to get away with some stuff. Now again, this is not about frame data because by most frame data, if she did this extremely correctly, like perfect down to the last frame of this, you don't get out when you backdash. But, more interestingly, you can't actually get caught most of the time if your backdash is long and she goes for light bolt instead, even though the light bolt is faster. It's because it doesn't go as far, and it doesn't go as far as quickly. And her V-skill cancel stuff is like 24 frames or something, so you really have no excuse at that point not to get out of it. Other things that matter actually involve when you got hit, which active frame of the button hit you, and a bunch of other little things that are very complex for beginners to understand, and therefore we aim to try to get it as more of a here, go experience this, rather than trying to figure out what the frame data means. One of the other interesting things about the game is that the way it buffers certain things allows you to just know that you're under attack and just backdash. Like, you're not actually trying to block. You see your opponent coming in, and because of the input lag and another type of defense thing, you are expecting when they will hit you. And because you expect when they will hit your block, you can just backdash immediately. Another whole tactic unto itself. But obviously it wouldn't be a kata if the only thing I needed you to do was backdash. That's not necessarily easy, but it's not super hard either. There's the other obvious thing of understanding that Laura, when she does this sort of cancel, even if she does the cancel, because she doesn't always do the cancel itself either. There's a version of that is a cancel and a version that isn't. And I will actually do a change on the inputs to show you this. But the important thing to understand is that if you have a really long button, and your opponent throws out a different button to catch you getting out, the recovery of that button on nearly every character in the game is about the same startup as your longest button. And what that means is that Laura is about to do a move whose intention is to catch you, but has a total of probably at minimum 12 frames. I think she has some that are actually quicker than that. She might have an 11. End of the day though, she has 11 frames on herself. Can't necessarily hit anything else necessarily. And even if your button wasn't that great normally, you're probably at nearly max range, so it's probably fine. She's not the sort of character who gets a lot of advantage there. So as you can see, you end up being able to backdash and with punish the fact that your opponent was trying to catch your backdash with something, or just keep up pressure. But all of this is super difficult when you start trying to combine it with everything else. Because at this point, you are literally trying to push your way out of Laura's space all the time. If you play a charged character, it's even worse because you have to do things like this, which is cancelling your button. Just to make sure it's working correctly, basically. Because all of this once again comes out in the fact that you were backdashing, and but the only time you actually have to do the charge of the move is during the backdash. And it's never quite enough, even with Bison's really good setups. Bison has a 22 frame backdash as noted. And I believe most of his charge moves are about 40 frames. And that button starts up in like 11. So technically, even if you waited until the last active frame, this is not necessarily how cancels work, But even if you wait until the last active frame, if you did this quickly, he would only be at like 33rd frame, 34th frame of charge for the attack itself. The game might be nice and give you a couple extra frames worth by the fact that you were backdashing, and there's some ways that it measures those differently, but overall, I can tell you for a fact that if you do this too quickly, you won't get any scissor kick. So you have to keep all of those things in mind if you happen to be a charge player as well. You're blocking, you're backdashing, you're holding back out of the backdash, and then you're slowing yourself down enough after doing all of those quick things to suddenly wait a few extra frames in order to hit the buttons you want so that you can actually cancel your move. And if you mistime any of these things, obviously, you get hit instead. But the amount of damage and difference in the game you can achieve by just going, okay, I can backdash out of that. And the cleaner and quicker you can do that backdash out of basic stuff, the more dangerous you naturally are. Even moves that are fairly plus from the opponent's side, if they're at the wrong range and then think that they can get you, it doesn't really matter how plus you are if the move you hit after it because you're plus doesn't reach. This is true in almost all situations, but let's keep this one out to mainly Lara for now because it's less complicated. So once again, note, she's hitting with this, and I'm trying to backdash out of it, and it's working, but not all the time. And again, I'm not really saying that this is timed properly. She is not doing this optimally, and it's something to keep in mind for when you're trying to do this and get really good. You will find that opponent who goes, okay, well, I'm just going to counter your stuff because I know what you're doing, and I just have to do my stuff faster. But the faster they do stuff like that, the more likely they are to leave themselves in unsafe situations, which is something most people don't like doing. Even players who spend a lot of time learning tricky things, learning heavy pressure strains, they don't learn unsafe versions of those. They find the safest version and they work with that. But as you can see for Bison, this is super easy. Because it's very hard, the same way it's hard for your opponent to react to a dash, it's actually also quite hard for your opponent to react to a backdash. Even though they are the one on offense and can see it happening, it depends on the type of reaction they want to have. If they want to chase your backdash, if they want to prevent your backdash, if they want to ignore your backdash, these are usually 3 different things for each character. Ignoring the backdash is obvious, you get to get out of pressure. Good. The skill of doing this is enough by itself to gain you some advantage, or more accurately, get rid of your disadvantage. But if your opponent decides, I'm chasing that backdash, I know that I'm at the wrong spacing to stop it, I need to chase it, and you happen to not backdash, then most of their chase moves are unsafe. Depending on how their pressure is applied, this may not be true. For example, Urian can do some weird things. And this is another thing that really determines how strong a character is at pressure. Their ability to deal with you when you backdash. Which moves trade when they try to get you out of the backdash, and so on. For example, on Chun-Li's case, you'll notice there, I got counter hit. That means I backdash out of something and had enough time to get hit for trying a move. Yet it's not happening now, and it's probably not happening now because I'm not fast enough on the backdash part. As always, there's stuff that you train in this game because it is really tight timing, it is really tight execution, but it is those things that let you have something to get better at that isn't critical to your gameplay, but it is how you get to like those really high ranks and start having different types of fun, or just when things are annoying you. Especially if your character doesn't have the greatest walk speed for whatever reason, but can in fact backdash out of the way really well. There are a few characters who are like this. Their walk speed isn't that great, but their backdash is awesome. Chili is not one of those characters. She basically wins out in all respects. But once again, you see, once I start to get it right, once I start to get the timing right, I get counter hit at that point. Now with Chun-Li, that's not necessarily meaningfully useful, because I'm hitting Hake in this case. I'll see what happens if I hit crouch medium kick or something, but I don't expect much to get there because it's all very, very, very tight timing sometimes. That was even more interesting because that was a trade, it looks like, which shouldn't have been. And therefore this sort of kata is for experimenting with, wait, what can my character do here to make your life as miserable as possible? Because I'm still getting counter hit there, but I'm not absolutely convinced that Winta was fast enough. And since there's a bunch of lows that go in there, depending on your character, you can get some stuff that you wouldn't expect to get. Invincible moves are obviously even easier to do this with. But yeah, it's looking like, with Chun-Li specifically, I can literally trade with this particular timing. And without going into a whole thing about what exactly that means in terms of measurement for this particular bot, I know that I'm testing correctly because it means that from the moment that I am able to backdash, the very first moment I'm able to backdash, to the first moment that Lara hits me, in many cases, is at least 24 frames. So while your version is not necessarily going to look like this, there's some interesting things to note about what that means. First of all, while I'm not a Lara player, I'm pretty confident that I input this relatively well timing. Because if you do the cancel correctly and then do another thing, she doesn't actually have enough time to do certain things at all, so you would have had to end the recording at about the right time. In other words, the bot is trying to do this based on a timing that is very natural to humans. And I will in fact pause her for a moment here to explain what that is. The bot starts its actions at that spot. The natural thing the bot should be doing, if it had a lot of time to do anything, since the first input of that action is B skill, and only the second input of the action is the medium bolt, It means that the first input is getting, as we call it, eaten. The implication of that is, even though Lara cannot cancel from that, she can't cancel from the medium kick either. Well, she's generally not canceling from the medium kick. So I'll start our explanation from the beginning again. Lara's hitting medium kick, and then from that medium kick, she is not able to immediately do the first move in a different setup. This is why sometimes, similar to when she's doing it with just the main one, I'm going to turn off Action 2 and show this off. You'll note that sometimes she does 2 kicks and sometimes she doesn't. This is very important to how this kata works, and understanding the bot, understanding a bunch of stuff about frame data. If you're a frame data buff, you can, well, not like frame data 5 level of frame data buff, but there's just some interesting things in just this piece of interaction alone, because it means that sometimes when she hits the medium kick, she has the timing to effectively cancel into the V skill. And sometimes when she hits the medium kick's animation is quote-unquote eating the V skill. So she has a specific timing set up here. This means that the first time she does it, just random V skill by itself in neutral, in this particular recording, she is basically taking an action as soon as she can after that medium kick. And then sometimes she's taking the action slightly slower, but it's not much slower. But the important thing is that it's around the timing that a human can do it, and that's why it's so easy to record this action, because all you're trying to do is do what a human can do. So, if you assume that she's doing the action as soon as she basically can, and that you hid the action in Action 2 as soon as you, again, normally humanly could, it means that at the moment you hit that medium and she does that move, it may not be as fast as every Lara player can do it, but it's as fast as most people can do it. Without a ton of practice, you're not going to be doing that much faster. So that's a good threshold for understanding about how long people who don't train a ton on a very, very specific thing take to actually execute it. This is part of why, regardless of your understanding of the character, games like this always have these tiny execution things at the very highest levels, because you're always trying to squeeze a little more understanding or damage or a couple frames of difference out of your ability so that you can do things that clip your opponent while they're trying to get away from you, or set up situations, or go for perfect meaties, or so on. As long as the game involves any form of footsies, it involves any form of close range interaction between characters, there's always going to be at least a couple frames dropped. Which is precisely why the whole controversy about tight links, one frame links, all of those things, why that even comes up. By most standards, if Lara did this immediately, since it's 15 frames on a minus, it's certainly less than would be required. As soon as Chun-Li backdashes, she's got 21 frames to get away. After those 21 frames, she's able to block. In the absolute optimal situation, after that, Laura should be able to land that move. That move starts up in 15. And Chun-Li's backdash is 21 frames. Chun-Li comes out of block stun 2 frames before Laura. That's literally 17 frames from the end of Laura's kick and 21 frames until the end of Chun-Li's backdash. Chun-Li should get hit every time. And again, if you were dealing with a perfect opponent, she would get hit every time. But we're dealing with a human. A human input this, and humans play Lara, generally. So after giving that whole frame data lecture, I'll get back to exactly why certain things are important and what you can use to measure it if you care about having a perfect kata to demonstrate things. Here's a piece of information. We don't know how many frames there are between Lara doing that and Lara doing that. But we know Chun-Li can block. So we know that it's at least a certain amount. And if you're used to doing this sort of experimentation with frame data, you can figure it out by this way. You know that as long as Chun-Li can block, there must be at least 21, possibly 22 frames in there. Your execution might not allow you to block every time, but knowing that you can block is important. It might also be something to do with active frames, but the point is, there is at least one scenario in which Lara hits that medium kick, Chun-Li backdashes. Lara tries to chase her with the medium bolt, and Chun-Li blocks. Well, since recorded and she seems to be following a very specific pattern, I don't think we're going to get to see it very quickly, so I'll move on to explaining why this is important. While Lara continues to defy me and not show off stuff I wanted. Sometimes bots help, sometimes they don't. We demonstrated before that at the minimum, if I hit crouch medium kick, or crouch light kick, in exactly the perfect timing, Lara and Chun-Li trade on that. And the only way for Lara and Chun-Li to trade in that situation, because it's not even an ambiguous move, we know she's doing bolt. We can see the bolt happen. So there I got counter hit. Was I too slow? Let's keep trying to find out. Conceptually, that's what we're doing. The backdash could be too slow, the light kick could be too slow, tons of things can be too slow. This is extremely quick close range reactions. Fortunately, while I haven't been showing it off before, she's really patterned, so it's not super hard to do this. So there, as you can see, I blocked. But the light kick was too slow. In fact, the light kick was so slow that it just let me block anyway. The purpose of the kata, though, is to understand how fast you can get away from Lara And not necessarily to hit her after she goes for the bolt. Because again, this isn't really the structural main part of the kata. I'm just doing this to show off why you would want to do this, even though theoretically you should always get caught by by her chase of the backdash. There we go. So we've finally seen it. Lara does the attack, definitely does bolt, and gets hit. And it trades. And that, with a bunch of frame data math, tells me, okay, there's 24 frames between Lara hitting the end of her stand medium kick and trading with Chun-Li's crouch light kick. Which means that technically I had 3 more frames to block than you'd think. If I have time to hit light kick, 2 more frames? It depends on how blocking out of dashes happens, really. But I've definitely got a tiny window to actually block. And the move she's doing is unsafe, so blocking is all I really need to be able to do. But let's look at my other options. She's fairly far out. Chun-Li has stuff that reaches far, but not bison far. So what happens in the situation where I don't think she's going to chase me? Or, in the case of this kata, probably, when I know she might chase me, but she might not chase me with something good to chase me with. Because her V-skill forward is a way to chase me, but it's not necessarily a good one. Obviously, blocking her overhead is another good part of this. So you can use it different ways. You can have her so that she consistently does the V-skill forward, which will basically give you the same amount of timing to hit the button. But if you want range, it might not work quite the same. You can use this one to test the range once, though. The highest level of this kata, with everything set up perfectly, gives her the option to do the medium kick twice. Doesn't happen that often, but you can easily test that one by turning off action 2. It gets a little tedious though, so obviously, you know, not really recommending it per se. So you're walking backwards, you know she won't do a low. So at this point, you're just walking out of it. And there you go. You're entirely out. But then what? If your timing is right, you get out. If your timing is off, you usually still block. So depending on your character, you have different ways of dealing with this. For example, Chun-Li has awesome ways of dealing with this if you can execute them. That's functionally a punish. I'm pretty sure Lara can't block that. It's relatively easy to test it also. If you input the kata a particular way, she'll tend to be on back instead. Now you could always just do that but there's a lot of problems in potentially doing that. But that's not to say that every character has that option, and understanding whether or not your character does have that option is another super important part of game plans. So let's think of a character whose backdash doesn't move them away from the opponent that quickly. I think the person with the worst backdash for this purpose is actually Nash. There's a chart somewhere online if you are ever interested in it. It's probably really important to find that out at some point, but let's find Nash something to do. Nope, he seems fine. Again, it might be the specifics of the timing on this. And there's some other stuff too that you can use. For example, as I noted, I've been using 2 and 5 before. But 4 and 5 also has a purpose in here. And since we're still working on Katas as a general thing, I haven't decided which of these inputs needs to be changed or not. But there's something interesting, and I actually didn't see this one before. I might be wrong about Nash entirely. That would be really good to know. I didn't check the thing. Also, it could be timing. But as you can see, you can be hit out of this when you attempt to backdash out. But I might be wrong and Nash is actually on the other end of the list. Because as you can see, when she does that and actually does go for the jab after, Nash tends to get away. She has to be really close relatively before that becomes a problem for him. And recognizing that range is also important, because if Lara does catch you with the jab, you end up back in a reset. And if she doesn't catch you with the jab, then you get away and get to punish her for stuff. Even given the fact that she hit the jab, depending on your character, again, of course. There are tons of tiny nuances in this. Even down to the question of whether or not you stand block that. I wish I could recreate this bot more cleanly, but if you guard her low and then stand block, it changes this input. It changes the interaction between Lara and your character. Not all the time, but it does. The spacing and the timing in which you stand block that changes things. But as you can see, that is a 3-frame move. That is a 3-frame move that is used for pressure. And yes, you generally should just throw Lara. But there are a few spaces, depending on your character's throw range, where that might not even work for you. There are very few characters for whom this is true, but definitely does happen. Also, Lara can just tech it. If the Lara player is completely expecting you to do that every time, they'll just tech the throw. In fact, them going for a throw with certain timings is an answer in itself. The reason for Lara to go for a throw after that is precisely because they know that you're going to hit throw. So they hit throw. If you happen to not hit throw and you also happen to keep blocking for some reason, then down you go, because most of the time she's in range to throw you. And being throw teched by Lara every time can be just as annoying or detrimental to your game plan. But as you can see for Nash, even though I hit throw and therefore got crash countered, there is definitely something. There's a spacing where Nash can backdash out of the aftermath of a light bolt. Despite the fact that Lara's trying to jab him, he just leaves. It's another thing you can force your opponent to think about. But it's not every range. It's not every timing. There might be all sorts of other things involved in it. I'm going to continue doing the research for everyone, of course, but my general assumption is actually that because you are crouch blocking, you are less likely to make it out. Whether that's because of the few frames it takes longer to input the backdash, or because the stand block range changes the interaction between the characters, is really not that relevant until you get further on into the game to understand those things. But for the kata, you need to understand that if you do it right, you get out of this. Even more importantly, if Lara cancels this correctly, you don't have to block. I can let go of, as I was noting before, I can absolutely let go of the block as soon as I see that. And because Lara has nothing that can block low, I can even get back to blocking before I'm done if I want to. You could like literally test yourself based on her hitting crouch medium and you seeing if your character stand blocks it. Stand blocks the bolt that follows, that is. Because that would mean that you managed to let go of regular block in time that the system read it as, okay, you're still blocking, but now you're not holding block, you're just standing there. You could also do it by going to back instead, depending on what your character does, depending on what your intention is. You have a whole bunch of anti-Lara pressure tech that has more to do with how long you block her pressure string and in what way you block the pressure string than anything to do with frame data. So what could Nash do? Well, let's go with the really, really obvious and just CA. I don't even remember which way his... Why is it I never remember his ways? Right, okay, we're good now. Probably need to give myself meter for that to make any sense, though. So there, again, I don't know why exactly it is that it doesn't work. I don't know if it's because I messed it up, but I do know this. If you get clipped by that from long range and you try to backdash, you can't backdash, but you will stand. Which means you can always backdash out immediately. Of course, if your opponent knows you're going to do that and sees you mashing, then obviously it's a problem. But my point is, I can watch that, I can block that and just start backdashing immediately. In fact, that's our best way to do that test. And if your character's backdash is good, you don't even have to worry about it. You just get out of even another medium kick. But again, note that's a 3-frame move. And depending on how good the person inputs the move, you obviously could get hit anyway, depending on the character. But there are quite a few characters that will just get out And personally, I'm willing to believe that it just works every time because the input buffer is big enough that I doubt anyone is missing the timing on that jab. But again, there will definitely be more testing. Testing to verify that that is the quickest that jab can come out, for example. But even if not, there's also spacings at which it's a problem. And there are other moves that she has that the opponent is more likely to think about using for various reasons that will cause some problems. Unfortunately for you, if they go for throw, regular throw, then they'll recover before you, even if you did backdash. So you can't really do anything. But at least you don't have to deal with a throw attack situation if you didn't somehow like that for yourself against her. The key though is when they think they can grab you anyway. When they go for something committed, some long committed thing. And your aim then is to figure out which button to hit in those situations. Because that seems pretty good to me, that she can just do the sweep and it will beat you. But sweep is another heavy committed thing, because that will happen. The sheer number of tiny interactions here, knowing just how long you need to block, in what way you need to defend from what, all of these things matter a whole ton. And the executional skill to buffer them is important too. Even stuff like that is which is yet another part potentially of the kata, just deciding I'm jumping out even if you hit me. All of that can flow into part of your ways out of Lara pressure, their ways out of Balrog pressure, to some extent Mika pressure. It's not all that difficult, especially for those players who do have invincible moves. But your execution is very important to this. Can you backdash into super easily enough to get away with this sort of thing? Because that's what you're aiming to do. And I think we can all agree it would look fairly sick if you got it done. But it's quite tight, and the execution can be hard for someone who's unfamiliar. In this case, I'm so unused to doing supers in that direction that I don't think I can actually do this on a regular basis at all. I could do that, but that's not really what we're looking for here. But when you hear someone talking about, oh, backdash into super, they're not talking about like just basic stuff, they're talking about difficult stuff. I wonder if I did that with light punch if it would work better. Either way, it's not that relevant to the point. So while this is again not a kata yet, let's review a little bit through this and things that you could put in the kata, things that could be your heavy focus, things that you really want to do while I change character so that we're not just sitting here. So we know that you can backdash out of at least two things that Lara does depending on your character. Her stand medium kick string. Even if you immediately hit the stand medium kick, you will actually lose, and the aim is to hit it from far away so that you can get when people do certain things. But that opens them up to you just backdashing out of it, which is why this is mostly a corner heavy thing. But if you're working through bronze or some similar tier and you recognize that your situation is people don't respect you whatsoever and do whatever they feel like, well, in that case, you have to find ways to make them respect you, which is what all our katas are about. Our katas are about making people respect you either through pressure, spacing, just so that they don't go, I can do this for free and you can't do anything. Because as soon as you've proven to someone you can't do that for free, they may keep trying, but the game overall changes at least a little bit. I would worry that this is too slow, but Fang's backdash is actually pretty good, so I'm not really concerned. In fact, one of the other reasons we were testing it in a particular way was actually because we figured that it's possible that her stand light punch is actually too short and her crouch light punch is better in terms of reach. But as you can see, Fang's backdash is really good. As in, Fang doesn't even have to block after that. Fang's backdash is so far that I'm pretty sure that her sweep whiffs. Yep. Hopefully Nash gets some of his power back. Because as much as people are like, oh, this character is so weak. No, Fang's backdash is awesome. It's just that it hardly never comes up because you'd have to think, you'd have to know to backdash out of this sort of thing in order to make use of that. And it's long, so it's not as if he backdashes out of stuff and then everything's fine. Because you could get chased down way easier on Fang than on most other characters, I believe. I'm pretty sure Fang cannot in fact do that. Because his backdash should be... his backdash's advantage is its range, not its speed. And Lara chases well, so... can he make it every time? I doubt he makes it as often. It's much more stressful on the player to get out of that. But for the sake of being relatively accurate in my stream of consciousness, let me check that one. Because I don't in fact know it. Fang's backdash is in the 24 range as with most people. So again, because of the previous test, we know that if you did backdash out of certain things, the frames between is 24, so if I do that perfectly, Fang will block. Once again, if your character has a 24 frame backdash, in here I'm doing this because I'm testing stuff, but if your character has a 24 frame backdash and your opponent is pretty sure that you're going to do it, you can't get away from her. But there are characters you can get away from. Especially when they're not willing to use certain moves. But now that we've used my testing facility and proven that, we can go back to looking at this one. So yeah, Fang doesn't care at all. He even has time to charge. Question is, charge what? And you can note that it's not that great because the moment he sticks out any button, I'm pretty sure he can get clipped. This has to do with the way that hurt boxes start up and a bunch of other things. And since he can't get enough charge for any given move while backdashing, he's pretty messed up in that regard. But maybe that pulls back his box and you could actually use it. Unfortunately, since it does no damage, your opponent will go straight through it if they decide to do anything. Which would automatically, like, negate it, so you wouldn't really want to do that on a regular basis. But Fang has something else he can use. Instant jump medium kick. Why is this useful? Lots of things, depending on which one of them you do. I got it wrong because I thought it was the forward one. It's not the forward one you want. Now obviously this is not really for Laura because Laura's going to do stuff that goes under that. But for other characters, now that you understand the theory, you can see how this might do something. It might do something dangerous too. He could backdash twice. Or if you really were dedicated enough, you could probably find some move that Fang does that does not extend his hurt box in the way that would be required for Laura to land a hit. There's one, for example. It doesn't hit her either, but it's there. He can just jab. And if he can just jab, it probably means he can do something else. The question is, what something? There we go. You can use this to lure with punishes, yes, but it's not really the best way to do that. But you can see the importance of being able to just do stuff like that. And there's so many things that you might think to yourself, okay, I don't know what's happening. You don't have time to work out how to do this in a match. That's what we're here for. We're here to help people figure out how to find stuff that they need to use, because you can't be finding all those sorts of things in matches. So a Fang player could literally spend their time learning when to hit medium kick because they're close enough for that, and when to hit heavy kick because they're too far to get hit by whatever the other player does. And of course, that move, while I don't think it cancels into anything, is still advantageous. Which means that if I timed it right, just about right, I would probably be able to get, yes, Otoja maybe? There's still probably something in your arsenal as Fang that you can get out of this. Even when you're in the corner, depending on the opponent, or you're nearly in the corner, your opponent still doesn't get to just chase you for free. As long as they're far enough away from the corner that you can backdash away from the initial follow-up hit, they don't necessarily win out. They get to use better chase options, get to use better buttons that would normally not reach, but that's not going to save them a lot of the time. It depends on how far away from the corner you are. And their understanding of that situation as well. Aw. Well, I didn't expect it to actually hit. That's interesting to know. I like that a lot. And now that I think about it, there's no specific reason why stand heavy kick wouldn't work here. Let's see what happens. Oh, this doesn't even reach, but you don't get hit. Maybe forward, maybe this one reaches. Looks a little off. Yeah, that one takes too long to come out and it extends the hurt box, so nah. I think even with my best timing that would probably fail. Stand heavy punch? Straight stand heavy punch? Probably the same. I can't imagine that being good. And yeah, mashing, but even then, that might be something that messes you up. You might not really... Mashing might not be the thing you want to do either. Even little things like this in your opponent's tendencies, knowing which button to hit because of their tendency of what button to hit as a follow. Do they sweep? Do they use crouch medium kick? Do they hit two buttons, one after the other? Pressure characters must do something. And that fact that they must do something leaves you with at least some advantage. I mean, they could just not, but then why would you worry about anything? And if you want to play absolutely safe, apparently you can just hit crouch light kick, at least some of the time. That was probably my spacing or timing issue there. There we go. Street Fighter is full of these little things that if you understand them, you can enhance the way that your interaction with other characters goes. And while I can't specifically tell you the way it works for every character, this is why people can have like pages and pages of notes for one character. Because most people don't just memorize all of this, and even as a feeling, you don't necessarily have the correct feeling for everything you intend to do. If it's in your character's style already, sure, maybe. But now let's do some testing on something that's more important. Now we're past the point where I've had enough time on the stream to explain mainly what this is for, give you some ideas if you're just killing time looking at it. Maybe hopefully have improved your understanding of Street Fighter at least a little bit. But right now I'm going to go double check something else that hopefully you weren't taking into account. There we go. So this is actually important as well. I believe we noted that Fang basically gets out of this for free almost every time, right? Now, not that Lara did the jab every time, but Nash was surprisingly effective at getting away from it, for example. And I think Fang did a fairly good job too. But this is a really character-dependent part of Street Fighter. Note that Karin's doesn't actually move her back enough for her to get away. She spends a certain amount of time before anything getting ready to backdash. She spends a lot of time with her hurt box still within Lara's range. So for Karine, who has the invincible reversal anyway, the balance here is that she doesn't actually get to backdash out of Lara's stuff. Sure, if the spacing is different, but at the minimum range, or even near minimum range, a lot of the other characters were having a lot better luck in terms of being able to get away from this than Karine does. And I saved this for last because this was the thing we were doing before. I'm not going to be going through any playing of Karine. We're sort of coming to the end of stream. I try to keep my streams of consciousness down to 90 minutes at a time, if only for the sake of the world. But the best way we can test this, based on what I was testing before, having the others test before more accurately, we know that Karine doesn't get out of it because Just Fine, Kansuki Dynasty, the rest of the team were doing work to figure out this as a whole. We knew that Juri and Karine don't get out. We know that can, but it's not completely clear what stops or allows him to. And I was worrying that maybe that jab was not perfect, that there were a bunch of timing differences that allowed all the characters in the game to get out. But we can see Karine still doesn't. And interestingly, Cammy doesn't necessarily either. At least on the timing I was just using. Of course, my timing might not be as good as it should be. We were testing on the crouch before. Cammy almost always gets away from the crouch light punch. Whether that's because of speed or hitboxes is not really clear. But here we have another character who has an invincible reversal, has a decent backdash, has some good walk speed and footsies and whatever, but doesn't get out of the pressure as well. But let's make sure I'm doing it right. Yep, that is approximately the fastest dash I'm going to get. Again, I'm obviously not perfect at this, but that's a pretty blatantly not escaping dash. And even if you just use the control factor that, well, it's one person playing, in this case me, my timing is not going to change that much. But it's an easy way to check that out. The character with the supposedly best backdash on this account. Ed's backdash is so good that you can literally use it as an invincible escape option. He can always be chased, but if you want to play Ed seriously, you should just assume that when your opponent is trying to pressure you with short normals, just backdash and you'll get away. And until you learn otherwise, and if you figure that's not working, hey, well, come here and test it out yourself this way. So, this is how you learn this sort of thing if you needed to. A new character comes out, you don't understand if they fit your style or not. Depends. Do you normally play characters who can just backdash out of pressure? Can you adapt to having a character that can't do that? I, for example, can't play... part of the reason I can't play Karine and Cammy is because I can't do this. I don't even backdash that much, but it changes the meta. It changes the way your opponent attempts to pressure you at higher levels where I sometimes try to play. They'll know that this won't work because you could just backdash. But as you can see, I'm basically doing the same thing with it. I'm not really avoiding a whole lot of Lara spacing or doing a lot of different things. I'm just backdashing because I can. I haven't put extra effort into getting this right relative to Cammy. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've done this much worse. I'm not even trying now. I'm just hitting backdash and if eventually I'm okay. I'm not stressed at all about whether or not I'm timing it perfectly or anything. Ed just gets out the way. And because he's so good at that, he really doesn't have to worry about very much. You literally could do this if you, especially if you like set a triple punch button and use the ES one. Alright, I'm not on her setup. Escaping free. And you can then always mix it up with just not doing that to mess your opponent up. In fact, I'm pretty sure Ed, the startup of Cycle Flicker means that Ed could literally mash buttons when coming out of this. No, didn't do the backdash part properly. That, on the other hand, is something that would be harder to time, because you'd have to do a whole bunch of specific Cycle Flicker execution stuff. See James Chen stuff on that. But even then, he has a lot of normals that would let him get away with stuff as well. Depending on the spacing, he could literally just hit heavy punch. Or is it crouch heavy punch? Probably medium would work even better. But all of that depends on your actual execution skill, which is what the Kata is supposed to help you train. And I literally came up with this more or less last night, so that's why you're seeing it in this form now rather than in a more complete form. But I figured it was nice to see. Looks like the medium punch puts him in a space where he's likely to get clipped if you press it. And therefore it's not a good plan. Medium kick, probably not a good plan. I might be mistiming it. But somewhere in Ed's arsenal there's almost certainly some button that does this job. Or maybe not. Maybe Ed's the character that doesn't have the button to do this particular thing. To whiff punish after the out backdash. That would be interesting in itself. Let's look at them a little bit. Seems to slide forward on everything. That probably doesn't change his hitbox much. That one probably doesn't change his hitbox much. That might actually pull his hitbox back. Let's see what happens. Why does that cancel in that direction? Not that I'm complaining or anything, but... I have no idea if that works against the sweep though. Nope. But if you knew for a fact that your opponent tended to do the medium kick for some reason, you'd probably be in decent stance for that. Maybe there's a range at which it's still the better idea. Maybe that will do it sometimes. So far she hasn't done the sweep yet, so maybe... Maybe you could delay it. There's all sorts of little interactions that you can learn this way. But of course, that's my favorite one. Because why worry about all that when you actually have a weaving back move for this purpose? And the regular version is even all that punishable in the first place. So if you ever said to yourself, why would I ever use regular Psycho Upper? This move is so useless. It has a purpose. In fact, it has a really blatant purpose. If you understand this part of the game, you can sort of recognize, even from the developer side, what they were trying to give characters. When you think, this tool has no purpose. There was possibly a whole thing where someone was sitting in a room doing this. Some tester was somewhere going, okay, I need to do this, and I need to do this, and this move doesn't work consistently enough when a human tries to do it. Y'all need to make this 1 frame faster. So for the sake of it being clearly still in the Mara stream, I'm going to Ryu to do some poster boy stuff. Ryu's is much harder, and actually that's why Ed is functionally stronger at that particular thing. Akuma I don't really need to show off because Akuma can reach with invincible moves, so they're better off than anyone. That punish is easy, but it's predictable. So we're looking, first of all, does Ryu just backdash out of this? He doesn't have the greatest of backdashes. Invincible moves help out, but he's in the Kareen. Generally, characters like that don't backdash out of that move all that well. Ryu can do it. We've actually tested, like, last night for a while, whether or not Ryu can backdash out of this stuff. But whereas Ed backdashes out of it in pretty much all circumstances, Ryu has to be poking around in neutral, like that. Ryu has to be a little further out, and Lara has to hit and go for it after that without specifically having cancelled it or gotten too close or whatever else. So as a Ryu player, your aim is to figure out the precondition, to figure out when should I do this versus when I should do something else. Whereas with Ed, you always do it, and then after that you figure out something else you want. Just backdash things. But if you do backdash out of it with Ryu, or you backdash even out of this, you can do, well, that was obviously not what I'm, no, actually that is what I meant to do, because I even did it automatically and everything. I was probably thinking about the wrong thing. What we do know is that when Ryu does this, and the spacing is right, because Heavy Shoryu is invincible on frame 3, there's a specific spacing where Ryu just does Heavy Shoryu. And the weird thing is, if you're super good at this game, you buffer that. You backdash, buffer the Shoryuken, see your opponent twitch, and finish it. I'm not that good yet. I would not be able to, at this point, with my limited understanding of how to play Ryu, be able to do all of that. Because I understand Ryu on a theoretical level. I understand Ryu frame data. I understand Ryu hitboxes somewhat. I understand invincibility of moves. I don't understand exactly how far away I need to be standing from Lara to backdash into Shoryuken off of her pressure. And I certainly can't buffer it. But Amara knows how to do things like that. Amara knows how to, like, know a move has too few frames to actually get hit by, activate V-trigger, know that the move's recovery frames, know the distance, and that she'll be able to finish it with ES Shoryuken if she wants, or even a ES Hadouken depending on the active frames of the move, recovery frames of the move. All that stuff is what makes you good at your character. That's what katas are there partially to help with, more so than bots. Bots are more so for helping you understand matchups, and there are very specific parts of matchups where you working out how to do it with your own character is important. But katas are there to help you understand your character. For example, I believe she figured out fairly quickly that that is what Ryu does at that point. He actually just hits crouch heavy punch, which is 6 frames and therefore awesome for this purpose. Maybe it's not right. Maybe I'm misremembering it, or maybe the timing is different, the spacing is different. All of these things matter. In fact, as you are noticing, probably if you're watching really closely at this point, the way that Lara resets this means that Ryu's option is always to backdash, because if she does that, and somehow Ryu blocks, then actually it goes back to the state where he could get out again. And I'm sure Amara will want to practice that later. So in this case you've got attempt to backdash out, block, oh wait, attempt to backdash out, Lara's always ornery. She'll give me a little bit of stuff, but never enough. And there's the moment when I should have done something. Come on, Lara, let's end off the night on a meaningful note. And that was totally not the meaningful note I was talking about. And that was probably it. And I failed it. This is what happens to you in matches. This is why Street Fighter and these games are hard. Because you have to do things like backdash out of that, see if they go for the thing again, backdash out of that, and then be ready to do all of that correctly in a very short space of time. I could practice this one for hours probably. Just to keep the mind sharp, just to keep the mind doing the right thing. When the pros are up there practicing for hours at a time, they're practicing how to get out of Lara double low defense loops. So once you have the kata, I hope it's useful to you. A lot of the main parts are going to be changed, at least a little bit in AE. We may not end up being able to use Lara for it, which might be sad because she's pretty good for it regardless. But regardless of that, I hope this was helpful in seeing the sort of depth that this game has when you are willing to take more responses to situations than looking at your frame data or trying to understand which of your moves are invincible for what or low profiling one thing or another. Even the tiniest bits of spacing change how matchups go, and the tiniest bits in design differences between characters allow you to take actions that other players and other characters can't take. So we're going into the holidays basically. Most places, as you know, are not open. Balance Patch is open today. We're going to go over to probably hosting theirs if they're up by the time we're ready for that. But next week, we will most likely not be streaming. The team will be busy doing various things. And presumably there wouldn't be that much to stream on anyway. At the end of the week, however, given when New Year's is, you might get this kata. It might be fleshed out by then. Depending on what we know from AE and what I can get done with it. It may not happen because of the differences in Lara's stand medium kick that might be coming through. But even so, with that, 2 weeks to 3 weeks to find some use for it and get in some practice before they change it might be relevant enough to some people. One way or another, this has been Rillian for Team 2_MK. Enjoy your holidays, everyone.